No one gave long speeches. The training had already happened, spread across decades in quiet installments. Every person in those chambers knew exactly what the moment meant and exactly what their role required. In the highest command center, a single message arrived on a single secure screen. It was 4 words long. Begin final protocol. The officer who received it read it once, acknowledged it with a key press, and turned back to her work. Outside, the sky was dark and full of stars, and somewhere among them, the Vreth fleet was advancing, certain of victory. Earth still said nothing to the galaxy, and for the first time in Vrath-Kel's long career of conquest, he felt something he did not immediately have a name for. The Vreth fleet pushed into the inner system with the unhurried confidence of a storm that knows it will reach the shore. Their ships spread into perfect attack formations, textbook arrangements refined across centuries of war. They sealed off human trade routes, cut communication lines to nearby colonies, and positioned themselves between Earth and any conceivable source of reinforcement. From a tactical standpoint, it was already over. The only remaining question was how long the humans would take to formally acknowledge what everyone could plainly see. Vrath-Kel filed reports with the home empire. Human defenses are minimal, he wrote. Their vessels continue to retreat. No meaningful resistance has been encountered. Recommend standard planetary subjugation protocol. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council observed through long-range sensors and ambassador feeds. The Council was ancient, composed of species who measured their histories in millennia, who had watched countless younger civilizations rise and stumble and either grow wise or disappear. They had debated humanity's status for some time, a species with potential, perhaps, but still unproven, still finding its footing among the stars. Watching humanity run from the Vreth, most council members found their private assessments confirmed. A minor species, one senior delegate noted in the official record. Unremarkable, likely to be absorbed. That entry would later be quietly deleted, but its author could never fully forget writing it. The withdrawal continued, and so did the strangeness of it. Every time Vreth weapons fired at a retreating human vessel, they struck empty space. Not near misses, not debris. Empty space, as if the human pilots had known exactly when and where the shots would land and had arranged to be somewhere else. Some of the Vreth gunners began requesting calibration checks on their targeting systems, certain there must be a malfunction. There wasn't. The young officer finally gathered the courage to speak. "Commander," he said, choosing his words with care, "I have been studying the pattern of the human retreat. Their spacing, their timing. I believe they are not running from us. I believe they are guiding us." Vrath-Kel turned from the main screen and looked at the officer for a long moment. The bridge was very quiet. "Guiding us," he repeated. "Yes, sir. They are drawing us forward, positioning us in a configuration of their choosing rather than." "They are guiding us," Vrath-Kel said again, slower this time, as if explaining something to someone very simple, to their own surrender. He turned back to the screen. "Increase advance speed." The young officer looked at his instruments. He did not speak again, but he watched, and what he watched troubled him deeply. When the Vreth seized a human mining station on the edge of the asteroid belt, they found it empty, not hastily abandoned, carefully emptied. Every piece of useful equipment had been removed with deliberate precision. The power systems had been shut down in proper sequence. There were no bodies, no supplies, no intelligence to harvest. It was as if the station had known they were coming and had simply tied it up and left. It was like conquering a ghost. In the hidden chambers beneath Earth's surface, manufacturing had shifted into a register that no external sensor could easily interpret. To instruments looking from above, the energy signatures were unremarkable, consistent with the background noise of a populated world. What those instruments couldn't perceive was the scale of what was happening underground. Old shipyard cradles, silent for longer than most Vreth officers had been alive, were no longer silent. Crews work in precise, unhurried shifts. Every system that came online was tested, verified, and integrated with a patience that had nothing in common with desperation. The people doing this work did not look frightened. They looked the way that people look when they have spent a very long time preparing for something and have finally been given permission to begin. A secure signal, narrow beam and impossible to intercept without knowing exactly where to look, passed between human fleet positions scattered throughout the system. Hold position. Wait for signal. The fleets held. They waited. The Vreth reached the inner system as the sun set over Earth's largest ocean. On the planet's surface, it was an ordinary evening. A family in one coastal city was celebrating a birthday, candles bright on a cake. Students in a university library were arguing quietly about a philosophy assignment due in the morning. An old man sat on a harbor bench watching fishing boats come in with their lights bobbing, the same view he had enjoyed for 40 years. None of them knew that above their heads, the largest hostile fleet to ever approach Earth was bringing its weapons to bear. On the flagship's main screen, Earth filled the display. Blue and white and heartbreakingly calm, it hung in space like something carved from water and cloud. Even Vrath-Kel, who had observed the death of worlds without feeling anything, found himself looking at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he raised his hand to transmit the final demand for surrender. The sensors flickered. Human signals appeared on the Vreth instruments. Dozens, then hundreds, and then vanished, gone so quickly that the system couldn't confirm they had ever been real. The communications officer looked up from her station with an expression no one on the bridge had seen before on her face. "Commander." "A malfunction," Vrath-Kel said firmly. "Recalibrate." But the young officer was already on his feet, staring at the tactical display with the focused, unblinking attention of someone watching something they understand is about to change everything. "Commander," he said quietly, "they are not in front of us." Space went dark. Not all of space, just the space around the Vreth fleet, in every direction simultaneously, as if someone had reached into the universe and adjusted something fundamental about the nature of visibility. Vreth sensor arrays, sophisticated instruments that had tracked ship movements across entire star systems, screamed with interference and went silent. And out of that darkness, the human ships came. Not from the direction of Earth. Not from the retreat corridor the Vreth had been pushing them toward. They materialized from the space between the Vreth ships, from positions above and below the fleet's formation, from coordinates that should have been, that were, empty moments before. They came the way a hell breath is released, all at once, without warning, filling the available space with calm precision. There were no warning shots. The first indication the Vreth received that they were under attack was a sensation of their weapon systems failing to respond to commands. Thin lines of light, barely visible, more like the suggestion of light than light itself, crossed between the human vessels and the Vreth fleet. There were no explosions, no sound, none of the dramatic visible carnage that accompanied the weapons of Vreth knew. The shots were quiet in a way that felt almost courteous. And wherever they landed, Vreth ships went dark, not destroyed, darkened, engines cut out, weapon systems locked, life support held. There was that much mercy in it, but nothing else. Ship after ship fell out of formation and drifted, massive and helpless, like furniture left in a room where all the lights had been turned off. The flagship's bridge descended into a chaos that Vrath-Kel could not immediately process. Officers shouted reports that contradicted each other. Systems were failing faster than they could be catalogued. The main screen, which had shown Earth's blue curve just seconds ago, was cycling through static and fragments of data from sensors that could no longer make sense of what they were detecting. Somewhere in the fleet, a command ship attempted to raise emergency shields and found that the command produced no effect whatsoever. "What weapon is this?" an officer whispered. No one answered. There was no answer to give. In less than 90 seconds, a span of time so short it seemed like an insult, the heart of the Vreth fleet had been neutralized. Not shattered, not boned, not scattered across a debris field. Neutralized. Stopped. Made irrelevant by something the Vreth had no category for, deployed by a species they had dismissed as children playing at war. Vrath-Kel stood at the center of his bridge and felt the full weight of his certainty collapsing inward. He had been so sure. The confidence hadn't been arrogance, or he had told himself it wasn't. It had been history. History supported him. History said that the young species always broke. History said that silence meant surrender. History, it turned out, had only ever shown him one kind of silence. Across the galaxy, in receiving stations in council chambers and military command posts, instruments overloaded. Data streams carrying the sensor footage from a battle arrived in fragments, stuttering and incomplete, and analysts who reviewed them simply ran the sequences again, certain they had missed something. The footage showed the same thing every time. The Vreth fleet, undefeated, ancient, terrible, drifting powerless in the space where Earth's blue light fell softly across empty holes. Human ships did not pursue the surviving Vreth vessels that attempted to flee. They held position and watched them go. That decision, that deliberate, considered choice not to chase, hit the observers across the galaxy harder than any additional display of force could have. Pursuit would have been understandable. Mercy from a position of absolute dominance was something else entirely. It spoke of a confidence so deep it required no performance. In the Galactic Council's chamber, the screaming lasted for several minutes before anyone could be heard. When the room finally quieted, it was because a delegate from one of the oldest species in the Council, a being whose civilization had been watching the stars longer than humanity had been walking upright, raised a single hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, and somehow that made it worse. "This was not a battle," she said. "We all know what a battle looks like. We have watched enough of them. This was a demonstration. Earth was not defending itself." She paused. Earth was introducing itself. The room stayed silent. "And we have been their neighbors for 300 years, she continued, "and we never once thought to ask what they might have been doing quietly all this time." Then Earth finally spoke. A single transmission went out across every open channel simultaneously, reaching every inhabited system, every outpost, every listening device in the known galaxy at the same moment. There were no symbols of conquest, no list of demands, no imagery of fallen enemies. Just a voice, human, calm, almost conversational, like someone explaining a thing they had thought carefully about. Earth has no desire for conquest. We have never sought the subjugation of others, and we do not seek it now. We are not a violent people by preference, only by necessity. But we will not be tested again. Whatever you believed about us, whatever you concluded from our silence, our patience, our willingness to wait rather than threaten, we ask that you revise it now. We are here. We have always been here. And we are paying attention." The transmission ended. No follow-up came. No clarification. No diplomatic rider. No list of conditions. Just that, hanging in the galaxy's communication networks like a stone placed carefully in still water, and the ripples moving outward. The alien empire that had sent the Vreth fleet dispatched its envoys to Earth within the week. The delegation was large, ceremonial, laden with the symbolic weight of an empire unaccustomed to requesting anything. They asked for talks. They asked for peace. They asked, in the quietest part of their formal request, for mercy, though they used a diplomatic term for it that technically meant recalibration of expectations. Earth did not answer immediately. The galaxy waited. Trading consortiums rerouted fleets away from human space, adding weeks to journeys rather than risk proximity. Military powers that had been quietly considering how to expand their territories in Earth's direction quietly reconsidered. Worlds that had classified humanity as a minor and unremarkable species began reclassifying. The administrative work of updating those records was, in several languages, described as deeply humbling. 3 days after the Vreth envoys made their request, Earth responded. The response was not broadcast publicly. It was delivered privately to the delegation through channels that left no record available for outside review. What was said in that meeting was never disclosed. What everyone observed was the outcome. The envoys departed, and the Vreth Empire, for the first time in its recorded history, began voluntarily returning territory it had taken from other species. Not all of it, not immediately, but the direction of movement had reversed, and everyone with an instrument sensitive enough to noticed. The young officer who had tried to warn Vrath-Kel was recovered from the drifting flagship along with the rest of the crew. He was taken, briefly, to a facility on Earth's moon. Not as a prisoner. He was provided with everything he needed, treated with what he could only describe as attentive courtesy. He was interviewed by people who asked him questions that surprised him, not about the fleet's weapons or tactical disposition, but about his warning. What had he noticed? How had he seen it when his commander hadn't? What, in his assessment, had the Vreth fundamentally misunderstood about their enemy? He answered every question honestly. He was then returned to his people, unharmed. He spent the rest of his life writing about the experience, producing 11 volumes that became, in time, required reading in the military academies of a dozen species. The thesis of all 11 volumes could be reduced to a single observation. The Vreth saw humanity's silence and interpreted it through the only framework they had. They assumed that a species which did not threaten, posture, and broadcast its strength must not have any. They forgot, or never learned that the most dangerous stillness is a stillness of something that is already decided. On Earth, life continued. Not unchanged. Nothing is unchanged by such events, but continuous. The cities were lit at night, and the oceans moved according to their own ancient rhythms, and children played in parks beneath skies that held no visible mark of what had happened in the dark above them. Workers maintained the systems that kept the human fleet ready, performing the same careful maintenance they had always performed. In the hidden command centers, officers monitored their instruments with the same steady attention they had given them before the battle and would give them after. There were no parades. There was no national celebration, no monument erected, no holiday declared. Some people marked the occasion privately, in their own ways. An old engineer who had spent her career maintaining systems she prayed would never need to be activated sat by her window the evening after the battle and watched the stars for a while, then made herself a cup of tea and went to bed. A commander who had spent 30 years preparing for the moment it came walked to a park near the facility and sat for an hour watching the light change as the sun went down, then walked back and resumed his duties. Humanity had acted. The galaxy had watched. That was enough. The Galactic Council issued new navigation guidelines within the month. No fleet would approach human space without formal notice. No hostile action would be taken within what was now designated, in 11 different galactic languages, as the sovereign exclusion radius of Earth. The Council also, after considerable private debate, opened a formal request for dialogue with humanity, not a request for alliance, not a demand for explanation, not a negotiation of terms. A request for dialogue, the word chosen carefully by a committee that spent 3 days on its selection, to begin, as they put it in their formal communication, at whatever pace and in whatever format Earth finds appropriate. Earth took its time responding to that one, too. When the response arrived, it was brief, and it accepted. And somewhere in the long silence between the battle and that acceptance, something shifted in the galaxy's understanding of itself, a subtle but permanent reordering of what was known and assumed and taken for granted. The scholars who studied it would spend generations trying to articulate exactly what had changed, filling archives with analysis and theory and conjecture. But the clearest version of the truth was simple and had been stated plainly by that old delegate in the council chamber, in the moments after the screens had shown her what Earth could do. The galaxy had watched a young species for 300 years and had drawn conclusions. It had concluded that humanity was minor, unremarkable, unthreatening, and safe to overlook. It had built those conclusions from observable evidence, from the smallness of humanity's presence in space, from the modesty of its communications, from the apparent fragility of its outer borders. It had never once asked what humanity was doing when it wasn't being watched. It had never once considered that the patience of an intelligent species, patient the way deep water is patient, still on the surface and vast and cold and moving beneath, might be something other than weakness. It had seen silence and heard nothing. Now it knew better. The stars went on burning, as they always had. The trade ships found new routes. The fleets recalculated the formations around the new shape of things. The signals kept moving through the dark at the speed of light, filling the void with a constant conversation of 1,000 civilizations trying to make sense of a changed universe. And on Earth, beneath an ordinary sky, an ordinary evening arrived. Somewhere on a coast road, a child pointed up at a star and asked her father what it was called. He told her. She looked at it for a moment longer, deciding whether it was worth being interested in, then ran ahead to catch up with a friend. The stars had not changed, but the species watching them had finally been seen, and the galaxy, ancient, vast, proud, and suddenly humbled, would never quite see them the same way again. The galaxy was never truly quiet. Trade ships threaded through ancient star lanes, carrying the wealth of 1,000 civilizations. Alien fleets drilled in tight formations near distant suns, rehearsing wars that might never come. Signals, political, commercial, desperate, joyful, moved through the dark at the speed of light, filling the void between worlds with a constant hum of galactic civilization. But near the blue star the humans called Sol, something changed. It began without announcement. No declaration, no ultimatum, no theater. One moment the outer edge of human space was as it always was, quiet, unremarkable, lightly patrolled. The next, a fleet appeared. Not a scouting party, not an envoy. A fleet so vast it blocked starlight, casting its shadow across entire moons. The ships were dark and angular, built from metals mined from the bones of conquered worlds. They were old in the way that only empires built on ruin can be old, ancient with the weight of things destroyed and absorbed. The Vreth had crushed 4 to 7 civilizations across 3 galactic arms. They had reduced proud species to footnotes in their own archives. Their warships carried weapons that could crack continents, and their commanders carried something more dangerous than firepower, the absolute, bone-deep certainty that they would win. They looked at Earth's system and felt nothing but contempt. Humans were young. 3 centuries of spaceflight, barely a heartbeat by galactic standards. Humans were soft, spread thin across too few colonies, protected by ships that the Vreth considered underpowered and charmingly primitive. The Vreth Commander Vrath-Kel, a being who had personally overseen the fall of 5 civilizations, studied the human system from the bridge of his flagship and felt something close to boredom. They will surrender quickly, he thought. The young ones always do. Without a single word of warning, the Vreth fleet destroyed Earth's outermost sensor satellites. Not with grand weaponry. That would have been wasteful. They simply swept through them, methodically, one by one, like clearing debris from a path. The small stations blinked out of existence in sequence, their last transmissions cutting off mid-sentence. No weapons were fired in defense. No distress signals broke through. The satellites died quietly, and in their silence, the outer edge of human space went dark. On Earth, the leaders watched. They gathered in a chamber built deep beneath an unremarkable mountain range, a room whose existence appeared on no public map and in no official record. The screens before them showed the same thing, empty coordinates where stations had once glowed. The people in that room were not politicians performing outrage to cameras. They were the ones who had always known this day might come, who had spent careers preparing for exactly this silence. Nobody panicked. Nobody shouted. There were no emergency broadcasts, no weeping anchors delivering trembling news, no president standing behind podiums to rally frightened citizens with hollow promises of strength. The cities of Earth continued their ordinary evenings. Restaurants filled with people. Children finished their homework. The lights of 1,000 skylines reflected off oceans that had no idea what was happening in the dark above them. That calm was not ignorance. That calm was the most dangerous thing the Vreth had ever failed to understand. Vreth scouts moved deeper into human space, scanning carefully, searching for the shape of the response they expected. Every civilization they had ever broken had shown the same early signs. Rushing fleets scrambling into formation, desperate communications flooding open channels, the frantic, ugly business of a people suddenly aware they were about to die. What they found instead was retreat. Human ships pulled back from the border in slow, almost disorganized-looking withdrawals. Patrol craft left their posts. Defensive platforms went dark. From a tactical perspective, it looked exactly like what Vrath-Kel wanted to see, a species buying time before the inevitable. He watched the retreat on his main screen and smiled, a cold, thin expression that his officers had learned to recognize as satisfaction. "They are afraid," he announced to his bridge crew. "They retreat the way prey retreats, in disorder, looking for holes to hide in. We will give them no holes." But one officer, young for his rank, with a mind sharper than his superiors appreciated, studied the patterns of the human withdrawal a moment longer than the others. Something in the geometry of it troubled him. The retreating ships always stayed just beyond weapons range, never panicking, never swerving, always precisely far enough away to be untouchable. He opened his mouth to speak, then thought of Vrath-Kel's smile, and closed it again. What made the silent stranger was that Earth sent no communication at all. No threats, no pleas, no diplomatic channels opened with sweating envoys offering concessions. Every species of Vreth had faced, at some point, talked. Talking was what civilizations did when they were frightened. They filled the space with words, stalling, bargaining, praying for a miracle. The absence of words from Earth was a texture Vrath-Kel had never felt before, and though he would not admit it to his crew, it pressed against the back of his thoughts like a stone. "Silence means defeat," he said, loudly enough for the bridge to hear. "They have nothing to say because they know there is nothing to say." His officers agreed. But in deep space, human ships continue to vanish from Vreth sensors. Not destroyed, not fleeing at maximum speed. Simply gone, folding into the dark as if the universe had exhaled and swallowed them whole. Far below the surface of Earth, in places that official history had quietly forgotten, Old systems woke up. Lights flickered on in vast underground chambers sealed since before most living humans were born. Encrypted code traveled through hardened channels buried beneath ocean floors, passed between facilities whose coordinates existed only in the memories of people trained to carry nothing written. In shipyards hidden under mountain ranges and beneath polar ice, massive doors that had never opened in a generation began to unseal, hinges older than the current century groaning with the effort, then holding steady. People arrived at these places without being summoned by any signal the Vreth could detect. They had been waiting. Some of them had been waiting their entire professional lives, maintaining readiness for a moment they had hoped would never come, never allowing themselves to believe it truly wouldn't.